The sight was powerful. The same woman who had told a man to go back to Africa was now handing out food to families of every background, side by side with the man she had insulted. A lesson for the nation news crews captured it all. By the next morning, the headlines were everywhere. From hate to healing, grocery store incident sparks unity. Black man responds to racism with dignity, teaches grace. Community chooses forgiveness over division. David was invited to speak on national television. Sitting across from a host, he explained, "This wasn't about shaming one woman. It was about showing that even the deepest wounds can lead to healing if we choose dialogue over division. Hate thrives in silence, but when truth is spoken with dignity, it changes hearts." Full circle weeks later, Margaret became a regular volunteer at the community center. Though many still looked at her with suspicion, she didn't run away. She worked quietly, humbly, proving through actions what words could never erase. One evening, she turned to David and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me. You could have humiliated me like I humiliated you." "But you gave me a chance to change," David replied. "We don't change the world by punishing people into silence. We change it by showing them a better way." And with that, the story came full circle. A painful moment transformed into a lesson of resilience, dignity, and the power of forgiveness. It was a quiet Saturday morning at the local grocery store, a place where families came to shop for the week's essentials. The aisles buzzed with the chatter of children, the squeak of carts, and the hum of the overhead lights. Among the many shoppers that day was David Carter, a tall, calm, and well-spoken man in his early 30s. Dressed in a navy hoodie and jeans, David carried himself with quiet confidence. He wasn't just there to shop. He was there to pick up supplies for a community food drive he had personally organized for struggling families in the neighborhood. As David walked down the canned goods aisle, carefully picking items off the shelf, an elderly woman nearby watched him with narrowed eyes. She was the kind of person who always seemed angry at the world, her lips thin with disapproval and her voice sharp like a knife. Her name was Margaret, but most people in town whispered another name behind her back, Karen. Margaret muttered something under her breath as David passed, but it was loud enough for him to hear, "These people, always taking over everything." David paused. He had heard such remarks before, and over the years he had learned to ignore them. But something in Margaret's tone was dripping with venom, and when he looked at her, her glare wasn't just casual annoyance, it was deliberate hate. "Excuse me?" David asked calmly, his deep voice steady. Margaret's face twisted into a sneer as other shoppers began to glance over. Then, without hesitation, she spat out the words that silenced the entire aisle. "You don't belong here. Go back to Africa." The words hung in the air like a slap. Gasps echoed from nearby shoppers. A mother pulled her child closer, shaking her head in disbelief. An older man dropped a box of cereal into his cart and muttered, "Unbelievable." David took a slow breath. His first instinct was to walk away. He had promised himself long ago not to let the ignorance of others dictate his peace. But the hateful words weren't just aimed at him. They were an insult to every person of color, every immigrant, every hard-working member of the community who had ever been told they didn't belong. So instead of leaving, David turned to face her fully. He set down the basket in his hand and spoke loud enough for everyone around to hear. "Ma'am, you don't know me. You don't know my story. But let me tell you something. I was born here in this very city. My father served in the U.S. Army. My mother was a nurse who worked through the toughest times to save lives. And me? I run a community program that feeds over 100 families every single week. This is my country as much as it is yours." The crowd murmured in approval. A young woman whispered, "Wow," as she recorded the confrontation on her phone. Margaret's face flushed red, but she wasn't done. "You people just take handouts and ruin everything." She snapped, her voice trembling with rage. David shook his head. He could see the fear and ignorance behind her anger. But he wouldn't let her poisonous words win. "Handouts. I work 60 hours a week running my own small business. I employ people in this town. People who put food on the table because of the jobs I provide. I pay my taxes, I contribute to my community, and I uplift the people around me. What exactly do you do, other than spread hate in a grocery store?" The aisle erupted in quiet applause. Even the store clerk, who had been stocking shelves nearby, stopped to listen with a small smile. Margaret's confidence faltered. For the first time, she seemed unsure, her hands trembling as she clutched her cart. David leaned closer, his voice calm but powerful. "You tell me to go back to Africa? Let me remind you, my ancestors helped build this country while enduring chains and suffering. We planted its fields, we built its railroads, we fought in its wars, and today we continue to serve, to innovate, to lead. We don't need permission to be here. We earned our place a long time ago." A middle-aged man from across the aisle spoke up. "That's right. Tell her." Others nodded in agreement. Margaret tried to speak again, but her voice cracked. You people just—" Her words trailed off, drowned by the weight of truth and the judgment of the crowd. David straightened up, his expression firm yet dignified. He didn't shout, he didn't insult. He simply let the truth speak louder than her prejudice. Finally, with everyone watching, Margaret abandoned her cart and stormed out of the store, muttering angrily under her breath. The automatic doors shut behind her with a hiss, like the closing of a chapter. David exhaled slowly and picked up his basket again. The silence that followed was quickly broken by a wave of applause. Shoppers clapped, some even cheering, and a little boy raised his fist and shouted, "Yeah! You tell her." David smiled warmly, his heart heavy yet proud. He turned to the crowd and said softly, "Hate only wins when we stay silent. Don't ever be afraid to stand for what's right." Phones were raised, cameras rolling. The moment would soon travel far beyond the grocery store, becoming a story of strength, dignity, and truth. The following morning, David awoke to a phone buzzing relentlessly on his nightstand. At first, he thought it was a mistake. He wasn't someone who usually attracted much attention. But when he opened his phone, he saw hundreds of notifications, messages, tags, emails, and missed calls. Overnight, the video from the grocery store had gone viral. The clip of him standing tall, responding with calm dignity, while Margaret hurled hateful words, had already been shared on news channels, blogs, and social media pages. Millions of people were watching. Some called him a hero. Others described him as the voice of reason in a divided world. David rubbed his forehead, feeling the weight of sudden attention. He hadn't asked for fame. He was simply defending his right to exist, his right to be respected. And yet, something inside him whispered that perhaps this moment could be bigger than him. The community response by mid-afternoon, people started showing up outside his community center. Families he had helped through the food drive came with flowers, thank you cards, and even homemade meals. A middle-aged woman hugged him tightly and said, "My son saw your video. He told me he wants to be brave like you when kids at school bully him." Others came with stories of their own, stories of being told they didn't belong, of being treated as outsiders in their own home country. David listened patiently, realizing his experience wasn't isolated. It was a mirror of what many endured silently. Reporters began gathering too. Microphones and cameras were shoved in his face. One journalist asked, "David, how did you stay so calm when that woman insulted you?" He answered simply, "Because if I had answered hate with hate, she would have won. My response wasn't about me. It was about every young person watching, learning how to face prejudice without losing their dignity." That clip spread even further, inspiring thousands. Margaret's letter later that evening. As David was leaving the center, he found a small envelope taped to the door. His name was written on it in shaky handwriting. He opened it carefully. "I am sorry. What I said to you in the store was hateful and wrong. I let anger and bitterness control me. I don't expect forgiveness, but I couldn't sleep without writing this." David sat down on the steps, reading the words over and over. The same woman who had shouted venom in front of strangers was now admitting guilt. His heart was conflicted. Could people really change? Or was this just regret from being publicly shamed? He made a decision. If she was truly willing to change, she needed to do it not in silence, but in front of the same kind of people she had hurt. So he wrote back, "If you want to talk, come tomorrow to the community food drive. Not behind closed doors, but in the open. Let your apology be as loud as your insult." The day of reckoning, the next day, the community hall was packed. Volunteers lined up tables with bags of food for families. A banner stretched across the wall. "United we stand." David took the stage with a microphone. "Yesterday the world saw hate. Today let's show them what healing looks like." At that moment the door opened and Margaret walked in. Her shoulders slumped, eyes lowered. The room went silent. Every head turned, waiting for confrontation. David gestured toward her. "Margaret, if you have something to say, the microphone is yours." She stepped forward, trembling. Her voice cracked. "What I said in that store was cruel. I let my loneliness and anger at life turn into hate toward others. It wasn't fair to you or to anyone who has ever been told they don't belong. I am ashamed." Gasps and murmurs filled the hall. Margaret wiped her tears, continuing, "I grew up in a time when differences weren't accepted. But that's no excuse. I see now that words can destroy or they can heal. Yesterday I destroyed. Today I want to heal." The hall was silent, waiting for David's response. Grace over vengeance, David approached her slowly. Everyone expected him to lash out, to demand punishment. Instead, he spoke softly, but his words carried power. "Margaret, your words yesterday cut deep, not just for me, but for every person who has heard those same words before. But today you stood here and admitted you're wrong. That matters. Change doesn't come from perfection. It comes from admitting the truth and choosing to do better." He paused, scanning the audience. "So I say this. If you are truly sorry, then don't just say it. Show it. Help us fill these bags. Serve the community you once insulted. Let your hands do the work your words once tried to undo." Margaret's eyes widened, and then slowly she nodded. She removed her coat, stepped behind the table, and began packing food bags alongside the volunteers. Some were hesitant at first, but soon even the children began handing items to her. The sight was powerful. The same woman who had told a man to go back to Africa was now handing out food to families of every background, side by side with the man she had insulted. A lesson for the nation news crews captured it all. By the next morning, the headlines were everywhere. From hate to healing, grocery store incident sparks unity. Black man responds to racism with dignity, teaches grace. Community chooses forgiveness over division. David was invited to speak on national television. Sitting across from a host, he explained, "This wasn't about shaming one woman. It was about showing that even the deepest wounds can lead to healing if we choose dialogue over division. Hate thrives in silence, but when truth is spoken with dignity, it changes hearts." Full circle weeks later, Margaret became a regular volunteer at the community center. Though many still looked at her with suspicion, she didn't run away. She worked quietly, humbly, proving through actions what words could never erase. One evening, she turned to David and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me. You could have humiliated me like I humiliated you. But you gave me a chance to change." David replied, "We don't change the world by punishing people into silence. We change it by showing them a better way." And with that, the story came full circle. A painful moment transformed into a lesson of resilience, dignity, and the power of forgiveness.